Hello, everyone. Welcome to this inaugural live webinar of Tutul Consulting. This is part of our series called Tutul Dialogues, where we have insightful conversations with unique people who have made an impact. It gives me immense pleasure to moderate this live conversation on building inclusive organizations, lessons from policy and practice from across the globe. We have an eclectic panel who are experts in their own domains with decades of experience behind them. Before I introduce you to the panel members, few protocols. Feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts, your comments, your questions, so that we can really have an engaging time. We have had more than 100 registrations, so it's really a wonderful forum for this conversation. Uh, we'll start with a discussion on trends, on inspiring stories, and personal journeys. After which we have kept some time out for the Q&A. So definitely we'll get on to the question and answer questions as well. So feel free to keep the questions coming. Yeah. Uh, just a quick, observation. And as I was, preparing for this webinar, this is a time of Durga Puja and Navratri celebrations in India, where the feminine form and the feminine qualities are celebrated. Hence, it's an absolute pleasure to have three powerful women leaders amongst us today. So let me introduce them to you. Our first panelist, Dr. Deepta Chopra. Deepta is a professorial fellow at Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex. After her PhD, she has extensive experience of more than 2 decades in research in women's empowerment and unpaid care work, politics of state-society relations, and the role of women's movement in effecting policy change. She brings perspectives from her work with the state and non-state players across the globe in different countries in the policy and practice of international development, especially in relation to her work in the care economy. She teaches many courses at the Institute, including Masters in Gender and Development, Masters in Governance and Development, and Masters in Poverty and Development there. Deepta, it's really wonderful to have you and look forward to your insights on government's role in policy making and driving inclusion. Great. Our next panel member is Prachi Rastogi. She has more than 2 decades of experience in the domain of HR, with the last 5 years leading D&I portfolio for IBM, first in India and now for the APAC region. Her current role includes ensuring gender balance at executive roles, inclusion of the LGBT plus community, and an accessible environment for people with disabilities. Apart from her day job, Prachi facilitates mindfulness sessions in the corporate world and educational institutes. Your perspectives on cutting edge inclusion practices will be really interesting for us, Prachi. Look forward to the chat.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Our final member of the panel is Dr. Meenakshi Krishnan. Meenakshi is Principal Research Consultant at Institute of Employment Studies, UK. With 21 years of experience in consulting across strategic HR, organizational development, and leadership development, including experience in corporate India, she chose to make a career shift and went on to complete her PhD at the Institute of Development Studies in the domain of gender development. And now she consults with government bodies, local authorities, and the private and the not-for-profit sector in the UK on inclusion strategies for the workforce. Your views from applied research would be really enriching in this panel discussion, Meenakshi.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So, welcome once again to all the panel members, right? And really look forward to this power-packed session. I think it's quite interesting to start off with your personal journeys of leadership, which I'm sure will be inspiration for our viewers here. Deepta, you have had an illustrious career in academics and working with governments across the globe. How have you focused on creating impact and building a career for yourself in the academic space over the years?
Thanks, Krishnan. Firstly, let me say what a pleasure it is to be in this inaugural dialogue series, and how topical this subject of inclusion is. And so I didn't really choose academia till quite late. I did economics at Lady Shriram College, which many of your viewers might know, and I was a little bit sort of dissatisfied, I should
Okay.
say, with the economic models and the kind of like static assumptions of economics, and that led me to actually bunking a fair few classes
Okay.
and going and working with children in the nearby slums, and
Okay.
that's how I actually started my career in the development sector.
Mhm.
I then did my master's in social work at Delhi School of
Okay.
Social Work,
Okay.
and went on to work in Bastar, which many of you might know is this sort of like quite ravaged by
Okay.
conflict. And but like I was really working with tribal women there, and
Okay.
it was not till I kind of decided that I was a frog in a very small pond, and knew everything about very little, that I wanted to kind of branch out and know more.
Right.
And I came to IDS as a student to study.
Okay.
And during my journey here, and like hearing different experiences, I really realized how much marginalization and
Mhm.
exclusion,
Yeah.
especially did women face in all sorts of aspects. I it was my experience as a young mother that led me to kind of work on care.
Okay.
And feminists often say that the personal is political, but once
Okay.
it's only when one has experienced that personal
Mhm.
struggle that one really realizes. And so like I saw how colleagues, friends
Mhm.
were struggling, but also how women are really left out of the workforce.
Okay.
Ostensibly they are choosing to sort of drop out, but
Okay.
choice, or and so my career has really been about bringing that idea of the fact that women's lives are made up of both paid and unpaid work, and that
Okay.
all of that needs to be recognized in terms of creating impact. It's really sort of a lot of work on building
Okay.
connections,
Okay.
on building solidarities,
Okay.
on building friendships, that
Okay.
and really listening to what people had to say, women had to say
Mhm.
to me, that it kind of like so I've theorized really from a personal
Okay.
experience, and then gone on to build a career. But I can tell you that it's not been easy,
Easy, I'm sure.
and I suppose nothing is. But like just to bring the fact that care is important to
Mhm.
governments and to policymakers and to businesses, and etc. Has been an uphill struggle, and it was, yeah. So I mean, I'll talk to you about later about how it's been a very interesting but a very
Okay.
steep learning journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So the lived experience translating into, you building the connections across has really, made a difference for you. Thank you. Um, Meenakshi, you've moved, quite a bit, right? From corporate to academics, now back to the consulting domain, and that too, across geographies, right? What would you say, and what would you tell our viewers on how to manage such transitions and carving a space for yourself, right, in whichever new domain that you get into?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's not, again, I would echo Deepta's sentiment that it's not been an easy journey. I think partly it has been driven by my personal interests. I used to always introduce myself in these workshops. You have to start with the letter of your name. I would say multifaceted Meenakshi. So I think part of it was always about me wanting to expand my skill sets. So after my HR degree from XLRI, I was working in the corporate sector, and then I moved into consulting where I did, organization development, and then started working a lot on women's leadership. And that was also the time when I became a mother, and the stories I was hearing from women in the workplace was around, again, what Deepta said, care, starting to really shape their career choices, and the kinds of balancing act that women needed to do, and the double shift, which is, work at home and then work in the office and then come back again and work at home. So that led me to want to research more deeply on this topic. And that's when I decided to expand the consulting experience I had with formal training in conducting and designing research, because otherwise I felt in India we were using a lot of research that comes from the West or the US or McKinsey, but did we have our own research studies? So I came to do my PhD here in the UK. And though it was not part of the plan, I've now continued to work in the UK. So in terms of, what I would say, managing such a transition, one I would say is follow your passion. I think it's really been my passion for working on these issues of bringing more people who are marginalized or excluded, especially women, into the workforce, helping them do it with well-being, not just do it because they must. And that's a topic that speaks to me, and that's why I feel my work is able to bridge all of those areas. The second, I would say, any career transition needs resilience. Because there are so many moments of self-doubt. On the CV, it may sound amazingly, wow, you've moved from India, moved to the UK, got a job, amazing. But the journey has not been easy for me personally, for my family. And so I think navigating those moments of self-doubt, trusting yourself, staying the course, and I think that's when the pieces all start to join. So today I'm able to bring the research experience. I combine my HR and corporate expertise. My PhD was on maternity benefits, so which is employment and labor policy. And so I think I've been very carefully able to connect all those dots. And today I lead the diversity and inclusion research and consulting. So our projects span all of this, and I'm happy to share a little more on that.
Sure. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the stay your course with your passion and, being resilient, right? Because there would be moments of doubt. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Meenakshi. And now, Prachi, I mean, your, intensive work in the corporate sector, right, over the last 2 decades, it must have been quite challenging, right? And how did you work towards, building a significant leadership role, right? And that too in a core, tech company, as they would say, right? IBM is, right? So how has that journey been for you, and what has worked for you? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Krishnan. So happy to be here. And, it's absolutely great to be sharing space with Meenakshi and Dr. Deepta. There's so much to learn from the both of them. IBM is a company where diversity really started 112, 13 years ago. So, hiring the first woman employee in the late 1899 is when we hired the first woman employee. We had the first person with disability in 1914. We introduced the equal opportunity policy in 1954. So really an environment which is very, very different. Somebody back then was thinking of equal opportunity, being an equal opportunity employer, paying every gender equal pay for the equal work that they do. So and the great thing and a unique thing is that nothing has changed. So it's not that all work is done and today there's nothing to do on inclusion. There's every day we are taking steps to make it even more inclusive. There are new people coming in. The challenges are different. And, we are in so many different countries, so many different markets. So the challenges are very, very different. People are different. Cultures are different. So those are the challenges you surely have to navigate through. But I think what works everywhere for us at IBM is the fact that we don't try to do or execute D&I ourselves as the HR team on the ground, but actually involve the business leaders. In fact, just before this meeting today, I was in a meeting with our exec sponsor for the LGBTQ plus community and the
Okay.
PA community. And he's a very, very senior leader at IBM. And
Okay.
it's just so endearing to see the passion he has for
Okay.
the work that we do. And
Mm-hmm.
for example, we've just announced a completely accessible payslip at
Okay. Okay.
in things like that, and he helped through and through. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
from an HR perspective, you have your own network, but that
Right.
network is very different from the business.
Yeah.
It's really
Network.
what has worked well for us is combining our work with business leaders.
Right. And how is your personal journey of, really navigating through that? What has kept you really going there?
My personal experience of being single
Okay.
in Asia,
Okay.
because the systemic bias was huge with
Mm-hmm.
extended relatives, and the family
Okay.
been very supportive, but a decision like that at that time, saying, okay,
Mm.
I want to get married, and I,
Right.
I just want to be the way I am and do not
Right.
want to conform to what people think about the right age for marriage. Was very difficult. Was very,
Okay.
very difficult for people to digest, whereas they had nothing to do in it
Yeah. True.
except make comments
Yeah.
to my parents and to me, uh, different
Mm-hmm.
kind of things which were not very pleasant to hear. So I realized that when you take a step which is slightly different from what the mainstream is doing,
Right.
people find it very difficult to digest, and they try to unconsciously, of course they're all
Mm-hmm.
lovely nice people, but they
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously make life difficult for you on a day-to-day basis. And
Mm-hmm.
it just dawned on me that, oh my god, there are people who are just by birth, by without their doing anything, they are
Yeah.
different. Somebody is visually impaired, somebody is differently
Mm-hmm.
different in terms of sexual orientation, sexual identity, not
Mm-hmm.
as privileged as I am. I'm
Right.
qualified. I have a very good job. I'm financially independent. Not all women are. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in any part of the world, not all women are this. So this comes from within, that because I've seen that bias myself. um, I
Mm-hmm.
I want to see how
Yeah.
I make a difference.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Prachi. And I'm sure the journey of sticking to your course was must have been really a great effort from your side. Thank you very much. Uh, as we go ahead with the conversation, I would request the audience to just keep sharing questions if they have anything that's coming up for you. Right, we'll take that more towards the end of it. As you can see, we have experts from research, right, applied research, and a practitioner as well amongst us, right. So let's understand what is really relevant and trending in the world of DNI, right. I mean, what's the thing that's really making things stick right now. Uh, Deepta, I mean, the work that you do with policies with governments across the globe, right? Um, where do you think the priorities of the policymakers are when it comes to promoting equality and inclusion, right? Any trends that you're seeing across regions or countries, that will be interesting. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, I I mean, this is it's in terms of when we talk about priorities, it's very hard to say,
Okay.
but I think that because trends change as sort of norms change and as regimes change. But I think that what I do know is that gender is very in.
Okay.
Governments don't remember disability at all.
Okay. Okay.
Um, Intersectionality is a word that is very sort of like I suppose embraced but not
Okay.
understood. It's difficult to
Okay.
pick up. So when I say intersectionality, I do mean like, so for example, like Prachi said, somebody might be disabled and a woman and from a particular socioeconomic background and from a particular caste or tribe.
Mm.
So
Mm.
we've got to kind of think about intersectional identities, which
Mm.
is something that governments are not picking up.
Okay.
What has been um, really clear is that, as I was saying earlier, and as other speakers have also reflected, is that women's lives are a continuum, and we
Okay.
need to kind of really think about all of those challenges. So I think what policymakers do need is evidence. They need evidence from researchers on what works and
Okay.
how.
Okay.
But it's very hard for governments to take that first step to kind of actually say, well, I'll be the first person or the first government to do that.
Mm.
I think that the idea of comparing, like, and learning from each other
Right.
is a very good thing that governments have picked up.
Okay.
But I just wanted to say that even in the world of care, there
Right.
are exclusions. So
Okay.
childcare is very prominent,
Okay.
but what about domestic work and cooking and
Mm.
cleaning and procuring food and procuring
Right.
water and firewood, etc.? Elderly care
Right.
is another aspect that
Other.
is not at
Mm.
all
Mm.
included. And even in governments, there, like, we can, you can think about maternity leave or paternity leave, but we
Mm.
need to still move governments towards things like parental leave, because
Leave.
otherwise it's
Mm.
reinforcing that double shift that the government, that Meenakshi also spoke about. So I mean, I think that in yeah, the priorities across
Okay.
regions in the world of care. But I think one of the big things that has become a trend is to speak
Okay.
about unpaid care work as a big roadblock,
Okay.
to
Okay.
women's empowerment. And
Mm.
actually, research shows I mean, and we know that care is a good thing, right? So
Right. Yeah.
it's been a really hard journey to kind of convince policymakers that care is a good thing, that care
Mm.
is what underlies everything, and
Yeah.
it's the disproportionate burden
Right.
of care on
Right.
women's shoulders that is the problem. So that
Right.
whole, like, so certain words sort of like have a life of their own.
No.
And and the fact that, oh, care is a burden has sort of like been quite
Mm-hmm.
stretched out. So I think that
Right.
there are priorities in terms of, and the priorities can be pushed. And that's the other thing that I've
Right.
learned through my
Okay.
work, is that governments can really uh, do have to listen, like, not just
Mm-hmm.
they do listen, but they have to listen to
Right.
women groups, collectives, collective action. All of these work in shaping the priorities
Okay.
of policymakers. And it's not
Yeah.
just the fact that these priorities are static. So windows of opportunity emerge where you can kind of really kind of like very quickly have a change of
Mm-hmm.
priority. And
Priorities.
those
Okay.
are very important for activists to keep,
Sure.
and researchers to keep kind of like
Mm.
abreast of. But I think, as I
Okay.
said, research and evidence is very important in setting these
Setting.
priorities.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, we would love to hear those stories. I think I'll come back to you about, what are those good things that few of the governments or, state players are really doing, right? So we'll touch
Sure. Yeah.
upon that. So it'll be good learning for us
Mhm.
as well, right? So, Prachi, I mean, managing the DNI agenda for a large and diverse geography at IBM, right? What are some cultural nuances that you're noticing across geographies, and that you have had to really contend with and kind of manage around that, right? So it must have been quite an interesting to see some trends, something distinctive across geographies. So if you could share a little bit on those experiences.
I'm very, very proud to be working in Asia Pacific, which is, of course, very, very diverse in
Right.
nature, very different from how you handle DNI in, for example, Australia and New Zealand, or
Right.
China, or any of the ASEAN countries, or
Right.
India, for that matter. India in itself is a big,
Okay.
giant, diverse in so many different ways, and inclusion is very different on very different from very different perspectives and angles. So
Right.
in Philippines, for example, the work that we would do on LGBTQ plus inclusion is very little because the systemic, uh,
Okay. Oh,
the culture is such that they're very inclusive of the
interesting.
LGBTQ plus,
Okay.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
community. Whereas if you go to any other market,
Right.
it's very different. For example, in India, we
Okay.
only got the Section 377 read down in 2018. I mean, it,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a crime to be from the community anymore, and
Right.
we still do not have the Marriage Equality Act, for example. We are still working on that. So
Mm-hmm.
so there are policies around that. You don't want to you absolutely want to be inclusive of the community, and I'm not
Right.
talking about LGBTQ plus. I'm talking about other constituents also, like Aboriginal people in Australia and New
Right.
Zealand. So the kind of work that you need for them will
Mm-hmm.
be very different for any
Right.
other members. Even when you work for women alone, just gender
Right.
alone, the work
Okay.
that you do, the sessions that you do, the workshops that you do for women in India would be very
Okay.
different from what you do in the UK, for example. It's a
Okay.
developed nation, and people have a different point of view,
Yeah.
or the US, and it's very different when it comes to any of the
Right.
Pacific markets. But the good thing is, when you work for a global company, your objectives, your goals pretty much are
Okay.
decided. But how you reach there
Right.
every market is very different. And there
Different.
comes the challenge because,
Mm-hmm.
for example, doing a a training on race and racism may not really work in an Indian environment. Doing something
Right.
on caste, or doing something, on unconscious bias, or
Right.
in general would really work well. Or work
Okay.
doing something for people with diverse abilities or
Mm-hmm.
plus inclusion is really important for a
Important.
market like India. And it's amazing to see the kind of acceptance uh,
Okay.
people have now. So, for example, in a
Okay.
carnival recently that we did for the IBM consulting business in IBM, we had a flea market, which is
Okay.
basically invited 30 plus LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs to have their stalls.
Okay.
There's almost 50,000 people across the country in different locations, different days. They
Right.
visited the
Okay.
stores and bought things from them.
Okay.
meant
Okay.
meant financial inclusion for the LGBTQ plus
Wonderful.
community. Now, something like this may not be possible in many markets within Asia Pacific region,
Right.
where there is very little to no acceptance for the community. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very sensitive to these nuances for sure. Uh,
Right. Okay.
but the one thing is clear that
Mm.
IBM, for its own employees, really wants that they come with their whole selves to work, which means our
Mm-hmm.
energy is not getting wasted in hiding. Uh,
Right.
if I'm from this community or that community, I'm not hiding.
Hiding. Yeah.
I'm really okay with uh, what
Mm-hmm.
what I am, and then
Right.
IBM or any other company would be able to explore my potential fully,
Fully.
uh,
Wonderful.
and also make a positive impact outside. So
Right.
IBM
Right.
responsibilities are twofold.
Fold. Yeah.
Yeah. So
To ensure the person is, as well as the what how he or she impacts the world outside is also quite important.
you go
Interesting.
to a dining table conversation, and if there's a comment being made which is not inclusive, then you
Hmm.
kindly, gently question,
Okay. Things.
not pick up fights everywhere.
Yeah.
Kindly,
Sure.
gently question that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Great. Meenakshi, you have worked with, corporates in India, and now, after a PhD, now working in applied research with UK employers, right? So what have you found are areas where your research can really help organizations, right, in the space of diversity and inclusion? Any interesting data points or, stories of women in leadership, etc., which you could, touch upon? That'll be great. Yeah.
Sure. So, so I think one of the things that research has identified, both, for example, my PhD research, like I said, was on the Maternity Benefit Act. And you actually find that it's not applicable to employers who have less than 10 employees, right? We know that India's labor policy legislative system is largely focused on large employers, which means what happens to those employees who work in small and medium enterprises? And this is not only the story in India, because even in the UK, where I'm now working with employers, we find that the small and medium enterprises have a much limited capacity, both in terms of time and resources, to execute and implement some of these initiatives. Like Prachi has really painted this amazing picture of things that IBM has done. But how would a small and medium enterprise be able to do that? So that's one of the areas we work on, to help them with the evidence, help them with the expertise, help them with the ideas, cross learning between organizations, similar to what Deepta said on policymakers, where they can you really carve out their own initiatives, even in their smaller space.
Okay.
The second area, I think our research is starting to now really come into the daily experience of corporates when they're designing the EDI policies, is intersectionality. So though it came as a feminist concept, Deepta introduced it, it comes from academic theory, but it is now being recognized. So when you have staff network groups, you are really not just making, one for women, one for LGBT, one for disability, but you're starting to notice that people are members of many different groups. And how do we co-hold these identities? So today, at least in the UK, if you go to a D&I conference, you will find intersectionality very widely accepted and understood and spoken about term. Of course, that comes with challenges, because corporates also don't know how to really leverage the strengths of intersectionality. So, that is still an area of progress. And the third trend, at least I'm seeing, is moving towards more of what we say invisible disabilities or invisible challenges. So, for example, neurodiversity, neurodivergence, including those people with neurodiverse identities, is now again increasingly a topic of conversation and research. Because it's not visible. A visible disability, I can put up a ramp, I can make adjustments. But for somebody who may have ADHD or autism, how do I make the workplace adjustments? Another area I would say is linked to this is the over 50s, especially in aging countries which have aging populations like the UK. I think there's longer working lives, and I'm sure India is very soon going to be in that same situation where we are seeing longer working lives. How are we going to ensure that multi-generational workplaces are being able to work together? Because the expectations that a Gen Z has from and work ethics they bring may be very different. So I think there is really an amazing time for research in this area, because there are so many nuances and complexities. And different organizations would prioritize different things at different points of time. It's not practical for an organization to say, I'll do everything for every minority group all at once. So how do you pick and choose? Those are places where we do consult and offer input to shape their journey.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that, Meenakshi. The changes that are happening in this inclusion domain, right? It's going beyond gender, the conversation, and like Prachi was also referring, even some of the progressive organizations are going into sexual orientation, including people from those as well, right? So that's amazing, right? Great. I mean, I think again, just a quick check on time, and I think we're good, and we're getting some questions on, right? So we'll of course take those questions more towards the end. I think as we are doing this conversation, we have also realized that there is an entire movement underway, like Deepta was also touching upon that. A lot of governments are now working and trying to learn from each other. Organizations are making a lot of attempt towards equality and inclusion, right? So let's try to understand some interesting stories, inspiring stories that all of us can learn from. So Prachi, I mean, like you said, a lot of progressive practices, etc., right, which IBM has been maybe doing for a lot of time, a long period of time. Could you share one to two interesting success stories in India, right? Of a change with respect to inclusion that really made an impact for the people and the organization.
So I'll share two.
Oh, wonderful.
One is an inclusive ally award that we introduced a couple of years ago in India, and done so very well in India, which is a very large market for IBM, that is being now introduced worldwide. So what we did was that we opened a survey for all employees at IBM in India, and
Okay.
gave them some 4 questions on inclusion. So, for example, my manager or this colleague has been an ally, and this is what happened, and this is how
Okay.
this colleague really has been an ally, has helped me, and did
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Right.
and feel included in the team. And this is a little bit of a feedback on what happened with the
Okay.
LI, and what's the environment that got created for the person who's writing. So basically, every employee has a chance to nominate an ally anywhere
Okay.
in the world, anywhere in the
Okay.
world. And
Wow.
some 40 people got selected. So our the feedback that we, the nominations that we got for over 20,000 people, and then
Right.
there was a very rigorous filter done in terms of how do you shortlist. Then you had to
Okay.
shortlist. So let's say if Krishnan, you are one of the person who've been nominated, how many
Yeah.
nominations have you received?
Okay.
So if let's say 10 people have nominated the same person, and it
Right.
does happen. So anyways, so out of those 20,000 nominations, we selected a few nominations, and finally, we just for one country, for India, we finalized for 1 year. We one time we finalized some 40 winners,
Okay. Okay.
they were recognized very
Mm-hmm.
nicely in the whole country by our senior most leaders, and then they
Wonderful.
got to share those best practices with all the
Amazing.
leaders and all the managers, and that
Wonderful.
created such positivity in the whole organization.
Okay.
Other
Mm-hmm.
managers, other leaders were very inspired to be an inclusive
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
manager. Uh,
Right.
to create, or even if they were not managers, as an ally,
Mm-hmm.
you just got power thinking of the stories that, you know what,
Yes.
I can just simply open the door and
Yeah.
be an ally sometimes, or just
Mm-hmm.
listen to somebody without judgments, and I'm
Right.
an ally. um,
Right.
so
Mm-hmm.
a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the times in training programs, people ask me that, how do I be an ally?
Ally. Okay. That's
Really, I mean,
interesting.
just listening to somebody without
Mm-hmm.
thinking what to say
Mm-hmm.
immediately after that is such a big act of allyship. So anyways, so that I
Okay.
recommend that to organizations, that this
Mm-hmm.
is such a big culture changer in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Shifts your culture, because
Right.
people then know that
It's something that's valued and that's necessary too. Yeah. That's amazing. Amazing. Great. Great. Great.
the other thing that really worked for us is the caretakers allowance policy. So while we were working on a lot
Okay.
of maternity, we do a lot of work for women who come back from maternity or who go for maternity, go on maternity, and how to sort of engage with parents who have
Right.
small children. So while doing roundtables with women who had returned, this was a few years ago, we
Okay.
found out that a lot of those women say no to client facing travel, because
Okay.
time they're lactating, or the
Mm-hmm.
kids are small, and they're
Right.
mostly primary caregivers, and they do not want to travel.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
they themselves said that if we can travel with our child, it
Okay.
works.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we created a policy where, and it still exists in IBM India, that mothers can travel with their children. I mean, of course, a
Okay.
particular age,
Right.
and IBM pays for the child's and the caretakers' travel. So mothers are
Wonderful.
obviously not going to be only care.
Amazing.
Child will also work.
Right.
So the caretaker will also travel, and IBM pays for it. Now the thing is that very quickly we realized that it's not a very inclusive policy, because it was only for mothers to start with, and then we
Okay.
included all other
Wonderful.
leaders as well. And at that
Okay.
time, it was like people leaders actually asked me, are you sure, Prachi, you want to do this? Because it's like,
Yeah.
and you can also take your partner, your spouse, as a caretaker. So
Right.
people actually said that, wouldn't it be a free holiday for
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
and the thing is that IBM has a brilliant culture of trusting people.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
to this day, the policy has not been exploited, it's
Mm-hmm.
used really well by all genders, mostly
Hmm.
by women, but it's
But
been explored by all genders, and so much appreciated. I mean, till date, I receive mails that I am past that age where when I can use
okay.
the policy, But I'm just proud of working for a company which has a policy like that.
Policy like that. Yeah, quite progressive, right? To really understand that need and kind of work towards making that possible for them. Wonderful, wonderful, great stories of what organizations can do to really foster inclusion. Wonderful. Deepta, as you were sharing, right, governments are looking to, understand some, good practices from other governments, etc. So, could you share some progressive work being done by, some states or, countries and governments, right, to drive inclusion, equality, right, and what have been really impactful as per your, knowledge? Yeah.
Thanks, Krishnan. And yes, I mean, I just wanted to firstly start off with sort of, reflecting on what both Meenakshi and Prachi said about, about the fact of listening,
Right.
and I really like your analogy of listening and calling, out people, but with care and with love. I think that, so one of the most inspiring things that I've seen in the last few weeks or years, I should say, is Professor Loretta Ross, who's a Black feminist in the U.S., and she has talked about how we call uh, how we, instead of we call out people and pick fights, we actually call in people and
Okay.
invite them to this dialogue, to this conversation,
Okay.
and to or to call, and if and that has to be done with a lot of love and compassion. And if we actually cannot, and forgiveness, and if that cannot
Mhm.
happen, we can perhaps call on, we can call upon
Yeah.
people to make choices about who
Yes.
they are and what actions they want to
Okay.
take. And I think that same approach has been really useful and
Okay.
really important in working with governments,
Mhm.
because governments also have constraints and legislations and things like that. And it just the idea of the fact that we listen to governments, we work with them, we work with their constraints,
Okay.
uh, but we also then call upon governments to make
Okay.
those changes that they are bound by
Mhm.
either universal declarations of human rights or
Okay.
whatever international treaties that um, they have signed. So
Okay.
and governments hold very strong power in influencing
Mhm.
social norms, but then so does media.
Right.
And so I mean, in fact, my recent trip to India, I was seeing, and that those are some really nice, even ads on the radio, kind of like showing, saying about how housework, or like there was a washing machine ad on on this dad who goes to visit his married daughter and then comes back and kind of like realizes how much you know his wife is doing, so her mother is doing, in terms of washing. It was a washing machine ad, but
Yeah.
I'm just
Mhm.
saying that there are so many things about social norms that can be changed. In
Okay.
terms of some inspiring stories from what has happened,
Mhm.
I think that one of the big things in the world of care and labor laws comes from Nordic countries, where
Okay.
they really talk about parental leave, and then they talk
Okay.
about, and some of the countries actually enforce paternity leave and say that
Okay.
there's a minimum that has to be
To be.
taken
Oh
by the
wow.
father, rather
Wonderful.
than just
The
because in most
option.
countries you can, yeah, it can be optional, but actually
Option.
here it is mandated. So I think that's
Okay.
something that is a very positive step. But of course, they've had very equitable gender norms, and
Okay.
this is in place for a very long time,
Yeah.
unlike, for example, the US or the UK, where, I mean, the
Mhm.
US is another story, like they have barely
True.
anything. But I think that the other places that have shown what can be done with little resources but a lot of political will are countries like Mexico and
Okay.
Argentina, and but also Bogota has these
Okay.
care blocks, and the mayor of Bogota was very keen and listened to these to research on how much care affects
Okay.
women's labor force participation, and but also was very inclusive in. So these care blocks, so there are three components to their care, what they call the integrated care system. One
Okay.
of them is care blocks, which is basically literally kind of like a block of
Okay.
places where women can come to, disabled people can come to. There are places for elderly people to spend time with each other. So there's like, it's sort of it's
Social
quite
community.
inclusive in the sense that it gives out like a lot of things. But then there is also,
Wonderful.
they call them care buses. So
Okay. Okay.
for residents that live in Bogota, it's easy to get to. But for people who live on the outskirts and do not have
Okay.
those facilities, they actually bring these care buses in. So I think that is something that is really important. And I think the other examples that come to mind are from the Asia Pacific region, where Cambodia's ministry is working very strongly with rural women to provide them water, which from rainwater harvesting structures, and that's something that's really amazing. And then Philippines, there are these their local districts are called barangays, and these
Okay.
barangays have money that can kind of like that. They have their own budgets, and
Okay.
it's the influencing of those budgets that so much can happen. But of course, like in the corporate world, some of these policies are quite far removed. But I think
Right.
that there are practices of childcare centers within
Okay.
factories, that
Right.
in fact in the Philippines, women have said that actually childcare centers within factories are more useful, so that instead of childcare centers near to factories, because
Factories.
they
Yeah.
they have additional time to drop and then come to
Yeah.
work.
Then. Yeah.
These are open to all genders, and
Okay.
I think that's something that's quite progressive. So yes, I mean there are many you know policies that corporates can instill. It takes a little bit of
Yeah.
courage, I think,
Right.
and
Yeah.
resilience
Hmm.
to put those policies in place. But then, like Prachi said, then people are proud to work for
From.
those organizations, and these organizations then obviously put like also you get back, yeah, as an
Yeah.
organization you get back loyalty, right?
Loyalty. Very
um
true. Very
so
true. Yeah.
so IDS actually has a very similar policy, Prachi, of like any employee, of any gender can actually also take their child and their carer, with them on
Hmm.
work. And I've done that, and I can tell you, it's not a holiday. I would rather that my child is back home rather than me trying to do work alongside whatever. So it's definitely not a holiday. It's bringing my double shift and kind
Yeah.
of saying, I'm going to just do a triple shift now. So I think,
Yeah.
these
These
things,
are
they really need to be
wonderful.
understood
Yeah.
by policymakers, both in governments as well as in private companies.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I think, like you're saying, it requires a lot of will and courage that way to really put yourself out there. Great. So Meenakshi, I mean, like Deepta was also mentioning, right? UK, Europe have been kind of pioneers in the work on inclusion, right? So with your current role working with government agencies, companies, what are some important aspects or initiatives that you're really seeing, right? Which are setting a certain standard. I think Prachi shared some experiences, etc. So what are those which are really setting a benchmark, setting a standard in terms of inclusion, driving equality, etc.
So I think that's really interesting, and I think the first starting point for setting that standard is a data-driven approach. So a lot of organizations will come and say, "Oh, we are committed to diversity and inclusion," but they really don't know where to start, or they don't know what's going on with their own workforce. So a data-driven approach, we find, is really the starting point. to then say, okay, which are the groups which are minoritized, where's their lack of representation internally, where are we not listening to voices, to people, and then building policies from there. However, again, I have always found that policies are just the first step, and unless those policies are backed by processes and practices, the policy on its own isn't going to do anything. So you can have an amazing care takers allowance, but if the culture is not going to allow for those kinds of choices to be exercised. So challenging stereotypes, I think, is really necessary for organizations who want to set a benchmark. I mean, I've had during my PhD research, and this is really just for this audience, that even where paternity leave policy was given, men were scared to ask for it because of how it will make them look. Right. So I can say, I have a 2 weeks paternity leave policy. Wonderful. But nobody is taking it. There's no uptake because the culture has conveyed that it's not okay to take that leave because your job is really to be the breadwinner. So I think challenging stereotypes based on data is really, really critical, and not make assumptions. So I'll never forget this one lady in one of my workshops many years ago in India, actually, was, stood up and said, she said, I came back from maternity leave and I know my boss wanted to be very supportive. So he said, maybe, you're not up for this really difficult territory as a sales rep. We'll give it to the man. You take care of your child. Now, the boss was being what we call benevolent paternalism. He was really being very understanding. But she's like, if I don't take a challenging territory, after 2 years, he won't promote me to area sales manager because he'll say, you've not done anything. You had an easy territory. So this assumption that every woman who's coming back from care will want to take it easy, or men would really want to earn the money to support their families and not do the care work. I mean, here I've even seen instances where people after 25 years of experience are willing to take a pay cut and start as a officer level position because they want to balance other interests of theirs. So not making assumptions, I think asking people what they want, what needs do they have, and then responding to that is I would say really key and one. And the second example, which I found very touching, was a client of ours we're currently working with who have set up something called the Dialogue Project. Now, this is really about, and I don't know how many of your viewers following this debate on gender critical views versus trans views. So somewhere even the whole, movement on sexuality and all has got now quite, debated and contentious, where some people feel that, no, we want to protect certain identities. But by setting up this Dialogue Project, this organization gave a space to employees who had very different beliefs on the issue to come and talk about it, rather than just say, okay, we'll have 2 separate employee groups and you do your thing, you do your thing. So I think developing this culture of trust and psychological safety is absolutely fundamental for any organization. You cannot have diversity, you cannot have inclusion when there's no culture of trust and psychological safety. So, promoting dialogue in that context, I think, is critical.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Quite interesting, the Dialogue Project, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that, shapes and evolves, right? Wonderful. So I think we have also got a, fair number of questions, right? Before we get into those questions, right? Let me do a quick, rapid fire with my panel members here, right? So we'll just do, a couple of them. So I just wanted to use 3 words, right? What come to your mind at the first go? So the first, is, what does belongingness mean to you? Because belongingness is, maybe a step ahead of inclusion and all that, right? So what does belongingness mean to you? So if you were to just share 3 words on that. You can start maybe Deepta first and then,
Belongingness, home, comfort, love.
Okay, thank you. Prachi?
Love, equality, intelligence.
Thank you. Thank you. Meenakshi?
Well, I would say care, trust, and responsibility.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you very much for that. I think, from there, the need for love and trust is, clearly coming out, right? That building that culture of belongingness is really, what we are all, kind of talking about, right? Uh, the next, okay, which I think a lot of, aspiring leaders, women leaders in our viewers would really want to know, right? Um, what advice would you give to aspiring women leaders? And again, as crisply, 3 words, 4 words, but yeah. So maybe we can start with Deepta again.
Okay.
Let me put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. Connections.
Okay.
Well, I suppose, yeah, connection, solidarity, that sort of thing. Um, maybe standing on the shoulders of giants
Okay.
and the whole idea of calling in.
Okay. Okay. Very nice. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yep. Meenakshi.
I think for women leaders, fundamental is courage. Going against the tide, it's still not common, and the expectations are not there for them to be leaders, right? So courage, and I think that courage is backed by values. So to know your own values and to stay true to your purpose. I think that would be my second advice or input to women leaders. And the third is resilience. It's
Okay.
not going to be easy. It's you're in it for the long haul. So keeping your mental health, keeping your emotional health together, I would say resilience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Quite insightful. Yes, Prachi, what would you
I would say
advise?
I love what Meenakshi and Deepta said. I absolutely loved it. So much to learn. I would say to women, you are unstoppable. I mean, just whatever you'd like to be and whatever you'd like to do, there's nothing which can stop you or who can stop you. There's absolutely nothing in your way except our own mindset, except our own
Mhm.
inner programming, which says I'm not good enough.
Right.
Am I not? I'm not worthy of it. So just go for it. Believe in yourself. Go for it. Make mistakes. You'll fall down, get up, and start running again.
Wonderful. Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, on that note, we'll go on to, the set of questions, that have come up, right? And it'll be interesting. Some of them are quite intriguing when I wouldn't, and I'm thinking about, some of them as I read them, right? Just, as, some of the current questions we'll just come on to. Just one quick thought, and maybe Meenakshi can kind of talk about it. I mean, there's also been a bit of a backlash of the DNI initiatives, right, in certain companies and certain countries, right? What are your thoughts, Meenakshi, as you're working here, and and what are your thoughts on what's to be done, and what's the view out there?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. It's really last 1 year or more. I think it's been not at all pleasant as a DEI, practitioner to read all of these debates and very senior political leaders and corporate leaders making statements like DEI should die. And it's very, discouraging. But I think this whole anti-woke thing, rhetoric, I would call it actually, it's a lot of words, is coming from a place of fear and a desire to maintain conservative status quo and power relations as they are. And I think what we're seeing on the ground, however, is that where there is a genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion, then this old talk around backlash doesn't matter. If I'm a corporate, IBM, I'm not worried about this backlash talk because I am committed to this agenda and it's my values. It drives my business. I can see the benefit to my people, to my markets, to my communities. I'm not going to get swayed from that agenda. Yeah. Just
True.
because there is a lot of media talk on backlash. The second, I think, what in the UK I found is different from the US context where a lot of this originated, is
Right.
a very strong legislative framework. So the
Okay.
Equality Act 2010 of the UK mandates protection of 9 protected characteristics. So whether you have the talk of backlash or not, and 1 year I may hire 2 less diversity leaders, I may spend a little less on the budget, doesn't change the fact that the law requires me to meet certain standards in diversity. And I think having a strong legislative framework has
Right.
really helped the UK, and now we have a Labour government here, So I would say, even for the Indian context, having a real commitment to that agenda for the genuine benefits it brings
Right.
and the legislative framework together can be very
Okay.
important.
Sure, sure. Thank you for that. We go on to an interesting question. This has come from Preeti. So, what practical ways can organization embed an inclusion mindset in leaders, right? Especially when the social narratives in developing countries in APAC, in Middle East, are not necessarily focused on equity and equality, right? So I think this is quite an interesting, and a tough one, I would say, right? So anybody, I mean, I don't know whether it's, Prachi, Deepta, anybody who wants to kind of share their thoughts, right, on this, you know, yeah, interesting.
I'd love to take a dig at it, and
Sure,
I'd love to
sure,
hear what Deepta has to and Meenakshi have
sure,
to say after that.
sure,
Uh, what yeah, and obviously my inputs are going to come out of what we do at IBM mostly.
sure, sure.
One thing that really works is that DNI is a business imperative as much as it is a human imperative. And it
Hmm.
is so clear now with in any client meeting. I mean, I'm in a client meeting
Okay,
2 or 3 times in a week in front of the client, talking about what we do on diversity and inclusion and what for that special projects for that client, how many
right,
people, diverse people we are going to hire, what our policies look like, and if we have an accessible infrastructure,
right,
uh, and the right policies for sexual orientation and sexual identity. So
right.
if client if your client is asking for it, there's no going back on it, and
Hmm.
business
Hmm.
business leaders understand that language much better than
Better.
anyone else.
Right.
Number two, I don't think we should push inclusion down the throats of people by
Hmm.
saying that you must hire
Yeah.
50% this, 50% that, 25% this, because that in the long term only it just breeds,
Resistance.
yeah,
Yeah.
resistance. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
Hmm.
They need
Hmm.
to understand that it's an imperative. They need to
Right.
understand that if I want to, as a business leader, create wiser, innovative solutions for the client, I need to have a diverse team. If I have
Okay.
a team which looks the same, sounds the same, they
Hmm.
will
Hmm.
create the same kind of solutions for my client needs, which are different each day.
See.
And
Hmm.
really, business leaders are so intelligent. They are
Hmm.
on the road with the clients, and they understand that their needs are, clients' needs are
Hmm.
changing. So if
Yeah.
I have the same kind of team, it won't really work.
Work.
And
Hmm.
it's proven that if you are a diverse company or you are focused on having more women in the senior leadership, you are,
Right.
most of the those organizations are 19% more profitable. So why
Hmm.
would a company not look for it? Only
Yeah.
when you don't talk logic with them. If you only
Right.
say, no, you should do this, you should do
Hmm.
this, without really making sense to them, it won't really work.
Hmm.
So when Preeti says,
Hmm.
uh, in APAC or Middle East, not necessarily
Hmm.
focused on equity or equality, I don't know how would a company really work if they are not inclusive of everyone. How would a
Hmm.
company work where employees are not feeling
Hmm.
100%, fully are able to bring their selves to
Hmm.
work? So
Yeah.
so equity won't really go out of fashion.
Fashion. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there would be cultural nuances, but I think, like, you keep on, working at it, and that really makes the difference. And you're right, wherever there is a positive business impact, it only, quickly gets, picked up, right? That's good.
I just want to add, Krishnan, if I
Yeah.
can, that another thing that would really work is the lived experience of these senior leaders. I mean,
Hmm.
Deepta started out by saying how her lived experience, all of us has talked about, drove our work, right? Same is
Hmm.
for senior leaders. Now, if senior leaders are, of a particular stereotype, particular
Hmm.
age, male, particular ethnicities, they don't
Hmm.
have the lived experience from other groups.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of our clients is working on a very interesting journey, and it's a charity organization which works with employers. And they
Okay.
have designed a 6-month immersion program for senior leaders of 50 corporates who will come and spend
Okay.
a day in the community. So they'll
Okay.
talk to community, they'll visit it, and these are like CEO, CXO level. So not just your
Okay.
HR leader driving the EDI agenda. And
Okay.
that is their way to create that empathy, an experience to walk in the shoes of these minority voices and groups.
Wonderful.
And I
Okay.
think once senior leaders have changed, it's like that you can't unsee that photo, no, the trees and the that you can't unsee a photo. Once they've had that empathic experience, then they are committed to the agenda. So I feel a lot of work, if especially Preeti feels, the culture is not generally towards equality and inclusion, creating opportunities for lived experience for senior leaders can be a game changer.
Great, great.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that, so one of my really lovely professors used to, has written an article on kind of like how to visibilize things and like, change social norms, etc. And there's like a 4-step, way to this in terms of practically doing things, which is, one is naming. So you name what the problem is. And you kind of like, you discuss that, and amongst people, you frame it. So you kind of say, okay, this is going to bring you money, or people are going to be more productive, or this is a human rights issue. And so kind of like knowing what framing will work for a particular organization will be really important. Then it's claiming, right? So you kind of like claim. So the once employees start claiming things, once the man starts kind of saying, well, actually, I can't travel because I have, this and that, my family responsibilities, or I cannot stay for drinks beyond 6 p.m. and make those decisions because I've got to go home and cook. I mean, so that's sort of like a sort of like again, that lived experience, but from a range of different quarters. And then programming. So, so programming is the most sort of like practical in terms of kind of saying that, okay, what is it that one, like this organization needs to succeed, to make profits. I mean, um, it's we now know from research that actually employee well-being is incredibly important in determining the success and the profit rates of any organization. So so what is needed for employee well-being, what is needed to have a changing marketplace
Yeah.
is going to be really important.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for these, different perspectives, practical experiences as well, right? The next question, is from Priyanka. It's easier for MNCs to implement changes as they often aim to reflect the ideas emerging from their headquarters. However, how can we localize these practices to align with our culture? There remains a significant difference between MNCs and Indian organizations. So how do we bridge this gap? Okay, so that seems an interesting, question. Yeah. Any thoughts? Anybody?
I can responding to this is
Sure.
that Priyanka, thanks for the question. I mean, there are two ways. Look at us at IBM. We are a global company, but have a very local response to anything that happens in India or Asia Pacific or Japan, the region that I'm responsible for. So it's not a global response that we have for any of the situations, any of the problems that we have in India. So in India, we won't really talk about race and racism when there was lots going on Black Lives Matter, but there was a different kind of conversation which was more relevant to the Indian culture. Similarly, I think the message for the Indian organizations would be start where you are, because your problems are very different. So you do not really have to see or do what MNC is doing. For example, for a company like IBM or many other companies, it's very easy to say because they are or do well, they have their own challenges, but still easier. They've been doing these things for 100 plus years. They have a whole lot of global support. I agree. And if you don't, then take small steps. Start from where you are. Maybe so if you look at India, the three main diverse constituents are women, LGBTQ plus people, and people with disabilities. If nothing else, start with gender and people with disabilities. If LGBTQ plus is an advanced step for you, is the next step for you, just start with where you are. Start doing 2 programs for transforming unconscious bias into conscious inclusion for all your leaders and managers, and if possible all employees. Simple. Engage a vendor. There are so many vendors available, partners available. outside of your company who can do this for you. If nothing else, reach out to me and I will do a session for your leaders. Uh, to showcase why D&I, why inclusion is a business imperative, why it has to be discussed on the board, why is it important to see that you have enough gender balance in roles that matter, not just overall headcount. Don't just keep adding women at the lower level and at the middle level. Uh, let's talk about getting women in
Yeah.
managerial positions. So, anyways, that also I would say come later. As an Indian organization, if you are in one, start with small steps, doing just a normal inclusion session,
Yeah.
doing just a round table to see how are people feeling about the culture of the organization, and then the 2 or 3 top issues or gaps you will see in the culture of your organization, start addressing those instead of seeing what other companies are doing.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Deepta, you do a fair bit of work, right, in India. And so any thoughts on this about? Oh,
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Krishan. I think, yeah, Priyanka, I mean, it definitely, like what Prachi said in terms of starting slow and having these successive wins, is really important. But I think it's also, to me, it's actually a good thing to that you're aspire, that there are good practices, and it also can be like with governments, we say we hold them to their promises, right? We hold them to their signatory, whatever they've signed on to in their international human rights, etc. So if as an MNC you've signed up to that, then that is something that you need to aspire to, and that's something that also gives you that momentum of saying, well, we cannot not do anything because of culture.
right.
And this sort of like, Meenakshi said this earlier. It takes a lot of courage, and the thing is that any change, which actually is a substantive change, basically means a change in the power dynamics in and within the company, and therefore it is going to require conflict, and therefore it's going to require like taking things head on, and again that's sort of like not picking a fight, but actually really inviting people to share their different opinions and saying, well, actually, what is it that scares you of providing, this whatever you're trying to talk about, and establishing, what is common and what is good about the company, and why, like, so I think that's really would be very good, very important.
Wonderful. Great. Great. Thank you for that. There's a nice comment also that's come, right? I mean, mandating leaders to have those experiences, then, yeah, in some sense, right? That's the whole lived experience that's, kind of important.
I would just
Yeah,
qualify that let's not mandate, because any mandation causes resentment. Or even your
that's right.
13-year-old will tell you that.
Tell you
Let's
that.
create the opportunities for it. That would be better.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well put. Well put. We have a last question from Lata. With India looking to reform labor laws on the lines of ILO, and a lot of work already done both by government and stakeholders, hope is government will enact laws which push organizations, irrespective of size, to abide by some DEI and regular people policies. What then is important is how Indian companies step up to living them and not just ticking it off as a compliance. In the light of this, how best can HR fraternity influence such change qualitatively? Okay. So, I mean, what I understand is there is a change that's happening in the context, and therefore, what role can HR play? I think we touched a little bit on what leaders and what they need to. So, I think now the question is on what do you think as HR folks, or the HR team, what do they need to do and how they can drive this change?
So, I mean, I'm happy to just take a stab at it
Yeah.
first while everyone else collects their thoughts. So, one thing I've always held about HR as a profession, and when I joined it, was that HR is the conscience keeper of the organization, right? So they're not a policeman, they're not the policy guidebook, they're not put you in jail if you've not complied, but they're the conscience keeper. And I would say that therefore the role HR can play is to be alert to all these issues and make senior management alert to these issues and facilitate those conversations. So a lot of the work that say I come in to do is when an HR would call me to say, we want to set a new EDI strategy for the next 6 months, 5 years, but we don't think all our senior management or board members are on the same page. So we come in to then create that conversation that allows those decision makers to engage with the issue. So I think HR can play a really critical role in creating that climate for those conversations, facilitating those conversations, thinking around it, self-reflection, because D&I is not about policies and laws. I mean, it's great that India's legislative framework is trying to introduce more things. I did an entire PhD on the maternity benefit law and the ILO convention. We can talk about it offline. We cannot rely on the laws to do the job for us. We have to self-reflect, and I think HR as conscience keeper can play a critical role in those conversations.
Great. Thank you for that. Right. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
could I just add, Krishnan,
Sure, please.
On the HR
Yes,
views?
please.
I'm not an HR person, but I do work in
It'll
an
be good to hear
organization.
from you then. Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that in listening and in creating that opportunity, that space for conversation that Meenakshi was talking about, I don't know what the role of employee unions is in private corporate sectors in India, because I've never worked in a private sector organization.
Yeah.
But I think that having working here in a research organization where there is a very strong fraternity of employee unions,
Okay.
of researchers, of other sorts of job roles. I think that that's what I see is that it is when there is a mutual sort of negotiation process of the ILO
Yeah.
entire ILO functioning is that of the tripartite
Yeah.
arrangement. So it's kind of like the employers,
Mhm.
the employees, and then so I think
Yeah.
that is a really important. So like the trade unions are very, very important, at least in the UK context, to kind of
Mhm.
provide that push and that sort of that impetus
Mhm.
for HR to actually influence
Influence.
that change. And HR needs to probably take these unions as
Mhm.
their supporters and their collaborators, and not in opposition.
Yeah.
If it's really to work.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for that perspective. Yes, Prachi,
I'll
you had.
add to that, it's a very big role that HR plays, and in two ways, and they both are things that we are doing currently. These are not just thoughts; they are actually happening in organizations. One is you do business resource groups within the organization or within a community, and their engagement, and they'll have their own goals, they have their own allies and leaders, and they will ensure that it's not a tick in the box, the whole inclusion exercise. They will actually make sure that it's becomes a ground reality. The water cooler conversations actually change, and they're not just policies and programs looking good at the top of
Right.
the organization. Two is, as HR people, we have such a big role to play. For example,
Yeah.
last year India had the G20
Yeah.
presidentship. So organizations like IBM played a very big role. We partnered with the G20 panel. And we worked on various policies, programs, and some of the policy programs are actually getting implemented now. Similarly, we work with forums like the FICCI, NASCOM, SHRM, so many different forums to ensure that this body actually comes up with the right laws, the right policies, programs, which organization which want to just start their journey or deepen their journey can actually learn from organizations who've done it well. So if the intention is right, and as I said before, that start small, take small steps, and then go big, really helps. And I think HR has a big responsibility not just to look inwards, but actually see how we can make a positive impact outside as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Prachi, Deepta, and Meenakshi. Right, interesting perspectives on what HR needs to be doing. Right, that's great. Um, I think now we are, kind of at the end. I think, yeah, there's some nice comments that are coming in, of course, with respect, ensuring that the HR team itself is adequately trained, yes, in being able to address insightful sessions, discussions. Yes, great. I think, thank you very much. I think it's been more than an hour of straight talk, right? What I liked about it is, I think some of you really said it the way it needs to be said, right? That these are not, something to be, sugar coated and, kind of, played around and messaged around or marketed around. It's real deep meaningful work. And like you kept on referring to, it requires a lot of courage, right? And I think what I also appreciated and liked in many of your statements was about the importance of listening, right? So sometimes it's not just about mandating and driving, it's about listening and therefore inviting them into the conversation and therefore creating, a completely new and a different, culture of inclusion, so that it becomes a lot more rewarding and that belongingness as well, kind of comes in, right? So thank you very much. I think we had some lovely questions from, our participants as well. So a wonderful time. I mean, somebody's mentioned a wonderful Friday, afternoon in India, of course, morning in the UK, but that's been really great. So thank you, Deepta, Prachi, and Meenakshi for taking the time out and sharing your experiences for such diverse domains, right? So that's what has really made it, so enriching for the last 1 hour, right? And we look forward to, maybe having more such conversations on other topics with, all of you on that. Lastly, thank you all the attendees. I think we had close to 50 people attending at different points of time with different questions and comments, which is really good. And we thank you for, taking the patience and engaging with the panelists as well. I would invite all of you to stay connected to Tutul Consulting for more such interesting conversations and dialogues, right? Thank you very much. Have a good day, have a good weekend, and have a wonderful, year and life ahead, right? So thank you very much again, all of you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Krishnan.
Thank you for inviting
Thank
us.
you.
Thank
It was
you.
very, very
Bye-bye.
nice. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.